before we transfuse anyone who may be going on to longer-term blood transfusion, we do a full rhesus group and a cal time, and then give the patient those blood products throughout the period of their transfusions. And if they do develop an antibody, we can go back, find out what their status for other antibodies, antigens were, and produce blood that's even more matched to them than even full rhesus and cal time. And that's been quite successful in reducing the amount of antibodies produced by the patient. But of course, the really big thing is iron overload. We've been hearing a lot about that already today. And everybody knows that if you don't have any extra iron, the bodies can cope with it. As soon as transfer is saturated, then we begin to get major problems in our major organs. And I would say that until 8 or 9 years ago, I used to have a very jaundiced view about patients undergoing regular blood transfusions because of this problem of iron overload. And we would always plump for bone marrow transplantation if at all possible for the patients. But things have changed. 20 years ago, when we looked at a cohort of patients from Birmingham, Manchester Children's and the Hammersmith, we found that only 9% of the children were taking Desferal adequately and were going to survive, presumably, into their 30s. But things have totally changed with the beginning of desferazolone. And now I go to clinics, and instead of patients having ferritins 2, 3, 4,000, we're often thinking about whether we should be reducing the dose because the patients are getting levels under 1,000. And I hope there's going to be a cohort of patients in the UK who are going to go on to our adult colleagues who have got hardly any iron overload at all. So, we immunise the patients, we do red cell phenotyping, we also make sure that we give enough blood. If you don't transfuse the patient adequately enough, they just end up needing more. And if you try and transfuse up to 16 or 17, it used to be this in vogue in the 1980s, then you also just find that you use more blood without getting any better quality of life for your child. We're very careful about making sure everybody's growing properly, they're developing well, and we don't do monthly ferritins, so we do 3 monthly ferritins. We check LFTs and calciums, we do an annual ECG and echo, and nowadays we do a T2 star scan. We usually do that on children who are about 5 or 6 years of age, and then plan to repeat it 2 years later. We've introduced ferry scans more recently, so I don't know how often we'll be doing those as yet. Depends on whether the values are high or not. The ones we've done so far have been really excellent. Now, I put this slide up because everybody knows about the Desferal toxicity, but it does bring up a point about how to use XJ properly or better. Caputi and Piga looked at giving Desferal to patients before at the same time as they had their first blood transfusion. And the results were good from an iron overload point of view, but very poor from a patient point of view, because many of the patients had severe problems with hearing and eyesight, and often they had very, very poorly formed spines. And then Dr. Porter worked out his ratio to how to give Desferal safely. But of course, it would appear that XJ doesn't do any of those things. And maybe what we should be doing is giving XJ right at the start of the treatment, rather than waiting until the patients have become iron overloaded. And perhaps we might be able to prevent iron overload altogether. Dr. Shaw also mentioned Dr. Blundell, who was also another heroic British physician who invented a way of giving blood to his patients. So once he'd done the studies that she first mentioned, he used to go around the hospital in Whitechapel, and if somebody was looking a bit peaky, he'd get a chair, stick it on the side of their bed, with this special tubing thing that he had, and give them a bit of blood. I can only hope that he was blood group O, or a lot of problems. But nevertheless, I'm sure that what we're doing now is much better than they did in the 17th century, and much better than was done in the Regency period in Britain. And I really think it's made a huge difference. Instead of being bone marrow transplantation as the first port of call for people with thalassemia major, I think that nowadays, certainly in my unit, we're looking at giving them blood transfusions and XJ, and trying to see whether they can go along without any significant iron overload. And then when they're old enough to choose themselves, they can decide whether they want to have a bone marrow transplant or not. And who knows, they might be able to donate sperm and eggs before they have to have their bone marrow transplant, if that's what they want to do. So, thank you very much for listening.
Andrew, for this 5-minute talk. Please, we'd like to postpone questions to the end to keep time. Okay, and now we'll shift to our next speaker, Dr. Mahdi Al-Kiadi, Head of Shabrawishi Blood Transfusion and Hemophilia Center, Board Member of the World Federation of Hemophilia. Prevention of disease complication in hemophilia.
Thank you, Dr. Rehan, for the introduction. I think we are shifting gears totally because the whole day has been running around thalassemia, and now we are talking about hemophilia. I hope that there is some interest. As well, I have 2 presentations, so I can give you the choice that I can skip the last presentation if you are hungry. So who is in favor of this raises his hand, and I'll be happy to skip the second presentation. No one, that's great. Thank you, Dr. Andrew, for the presentation. It happened that Paula Borton-Mack was working with us in the World Federation of Hemophilia. We enjoyed her, and now she's shifting gear as well to control the UK shot, as I know.
Yes,
yes. Yes. And she's from Manchester as well.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much. So what we have been advocating over the last 2-3 years is trying to improve the situation of care of our hemophilic, particularly our growing hemophilic kids. We are very happy that we have the health insurance here. The subsequent presentation is from Dr. Nagla, and we hope that they will adopt what we are trying to do. So, I mean, this is the cycle of the damage of the joints and muscles in hemophilia. It starts with the hemorrhage, and then we have synovial inflammation, and this will lead to the vicious circle of recurrent hemarthrosis, synovial hypertrophy, and then synovial impingement and contracture and functional loss. And eventually we have obstruction of the cartilage and the joint, and the patients are eventually limited. We have run a study with Arab Shibastava in 9 developing countries over the period from 2005 to 2010. And unfortunately, we find no matter what we follow, we have a progressive disability of these kids starting from the age of 5 to the age of 15, where the disability is profound. So how can we break this vicious circle? And this is the slide from, I think, blood transfusion, which describes the different protocols of treatment of, or management of patients with hemophilia, where the gold standard that was proven by the Sweden and subsequently by the Dutch is the primary prophylaxis or early secondary prophylaxis, which can stop this vicious circle and prevent the progressive arthropathy and the handicapping. And then we have the late and secondary prophylaxis in adolescents, and short-term prophylaxis, or the on-demand, which we largely practice, and which actually ends that we are spending a lot into getting nothing in these patients. These patients will become, by the age of 15 to 20, with a very variable degree of handicapping. So the prophylaxis is the gold standard, and what I will try to do very fast is to define what's prophylaxis, the history, the evidence of superiority, and then what we try to advocate for each. So prophylaxis is regular injection of protein factor concentrate at a specific time interval to maintain the trough level above 1%. Now they are advocating for above 5%. So we need to increase even our doses. But let's even try to reach a trough level above 1%. There is a big number of studies that were showing that prophylaxis is superior to on-demand. One important study in 2003 which showed the prophylaxis in Netherlands and Sweden compared to France at this time on demand. And you can see here how close is the amount of factor concentrate used on demand or the intermediate dose prophylaxis in the Dutch protocols. But the outcome is totally different when you are using on demand. You have progressive damage here in the Peterson score and the orthopedic joint score in the on demand in France at this time, and to much better outcome in the Netherlands on the intermediate dose. And when we compare the intermediate dose to the high dose, which is almost double the dose between the Swedish and the Netherlands, we find that the difference is not very significant. So probably we can think of different doses based on this. The evidence of superiority came from two studies, from the Manco-Johnson study, which was a controlled randomized study, and from the Gringiri study in Italy, which showed superiority of prophylaxis by reducing the number of joint and soft tissue bleeds, reduced mobility and absence from school, and preserved joints as evidenced clinically and radiologically. So this was a very important landmark to show to the authorities that prophylaxis is superior. So when we want to implement a prophylaxis, we have the stages, the initial introduction of prophylaxis to a child during the first 3 years of life, which we probably in several centers are doing right now, trying to see the effect. And then the establishment of regular pattern of factor administration, the modification when they go to schools and have enhanced physical activity, and then the potential modification when they reach the adult. And we can see the comparison between two protocols, the Swedish and the Dutch, where here they start at 1 to 2 years of age, and they inject 3 times per week, and the dose is high, 6,000 IU per kg per week. In the Dutch protocol, they start after 1 to 2 joint bleeds, and this can save 2 years of prophylaxis. If you wait until 2 joint bleeds in the index joint, can save you 2 years of prophylaxis. Mean age will start, you can see here, it's from 2 years to almost 4 years. Tailor protocol according to phenotype severity, and the intermediate dose is about 3,000 units per kg. So half the dose goes. The outcome, if we look into it, we find that on the long-term comparison, there is no significant difference in the outcome regarding the integration and mobility. Now there are much more sensitive tools used to evaluate these patients, which may create a significance, but as a whole, on the long term, there is no significant need regarding the activity and the integration into the society. The third protocol is the Canadian prophylaxis protocol, which is tailored. Increase of factor VIII dosing is dependent on breakthrough bleed, something similar to the Dutch protocol. Concentrate dose of 50 IU once weekly, and then escalated to 2 steps to prophylaxis at a dose of 25 IU per kg factor VIII on alternate days. The analysis showed that the results, the primary results, because it is not as old as the Dutch and the Swedish protocol, that it can be effective at all. The new thing is the patient-tailored prophylaxis, which can be based on pharmacokinetic studies and on the clinical phenotype. Because you can have laboratory severe patients, but they will behave differently clinically. If we can look into this cohort of patients where we studied the pharmacokinetics of the solvent detergent crab precipitate factor VIII, and you will see that the residual at 36 hours is different between different patients. So if you tailor this, you can probably increase or decrease your weekly doses according to the pharmacokinetics from each patient. Or if you can notice that your patient is not a severe bleeder, he has a mild phenotype, so you can modify your prophylaxis dosage. One of the important things is the venous access. So if you start very early, you may probably need to insert portal cap. If you wait, like the Dutch protocol, when you start later, probably the venous access is much easier, so that you can use the peripheral veins. One important issue in planning infusions should be planned on days of intensive activity, and morning infusions are best to cover the activities of high factor VIII. So if you have your I mean, the physical exercise in the school on a specific day, you may plan your prophylaxis dose on this day. Of course, this is not largely used here in Egypt, but if we will provide home treatment logistics, we need to make sure that the patient and family have competent venous access technique, ensuring available supply of clotting concentrates, knowledge of appropriate storage and safe disposal, detailed data collection for follow-up, and knowledge of symptoms of specific spontaneous and traumatic bleeds, so they are not delayed if they have a traumatic bleed that can be serious to come to the center. And knowledge of how and when to seek professional advice. The monitor of the prophylaxis, you need to know the basal level of factor VIII. You need to screen for factor VIII inhibitors. You need to do the recovery or pharmacokinetic studies and clinical and radiological evaluation of muscles, joints, and CNS. Now there is progressive use of ultrasounds and MRIs, and at least for our communities, we need to start to develop the ultrasound follow-up on the joints and muscles. For the monitoring, during the first 50 exposure days, you need to record the infusions to do the screen for inhibitors every 4th exposure day until the first 20 exposure days. Then you can do it less frequently every 3 months, and you need to record the breakthrough bleeds. After the 50 exposure days, regular inhibitor screening every 6 months, recording of breakthrough bleed, prompt and effective treatment for any breakthrough bleed according to approved guidelines, regular visit to the hemophilia center for evaluation, and factor VIII adjustment because your patient is growing older and his activity is increasing. How do you evaluate the success of your program? You have a short-term outcome, which is the annual number of joint bleed, and the long-term outcome, which is the clinical score and the radiological score. And of course, you need to evaluate the treatment cost as a cost effectiveness. So what we are trying to advocate, and we discussed in the World Federation of Hemophilia in developing countries, why not to go lower, with lower doses, and to see if this can be effective or not compared to the on-demand therapy. So we discussed, I think, for over several sessions, the low-dose prophylaxis, and we discussed the inclusion criteria, the age, the duration, the dose, the treatment of breakthrough bleeds, dropout of patients, outcome measurements, and patient consent. And we hope, I know that several centers are doing this, we hope that we can collect the data together so that we can produce a significant data to present in publications or to discuss with the authorities. So we decided to include severe hemophilia A below 1% or below 2% with repeated attacks of spontaneous bleeds, because probably identifying below 1% in the laboratory is not an easy task. The exclusion history of adverse drug events or inhibitors. The age between 2 to 4 years, minimum age 2 years in a patient who had 2 bleeds in an index joint, or maximum 4 years with no joint bleeds or 1 bleed in an index joint. The primary target of duration enrollment of patients best started in 2006 during 6 months, and prophylaxis for 3 years to follow on the success of the program. We agreed that we will start with 20 international units of factor VIII once per week. If breakthrough bleed increased to 40 international units per week to be given twice weekly. Breakthrough bleed 20 IU for minor and 50 IU per kg for the major, and then you resume prophylaxis. And when we reach to 5 years, we need to evaluate what doses. Dropouts, if inhibitors develops, or if patients are non-compliant. The primary outcome measures radiological score, functional score, and no major CNS or internal bleeds. This is at the end of the evaluation, which is for 3 years. The primary evaluation. All patient consent for all patients, they should sign consent. In our center, we have now, I think, we have progressed now to about 8 patients. But 5 or 6 of them have been for, some of them are closing now to 2 years of follow-up. You can see here that they are more or less compliant. 4 of them is on cogenate and 2 on solvent detergent triprecipitate. the dose is 20 IU per kg, the frequency once weekly, set one who is, started his school, so we switched to 2 doses per week. The spontaneous bleeds you can see over 2 years are very much reduced. The maximum of them was like 5 bleeds per year. Some of them are traumatic, and some was spontaneous bleeds, and only I think few of them needed treatment outside their prophylaxis treatment. So in conclusion, prophylaxis is a gold standard for lifelong management. Now we have several centers. We need to collect our data to follow if this low-dose prophylaxis can be successful, because it can help the future of our children. Thank you.
بالنسبه للموضوع الكومبليكيشن ثيرابي في الهيموفيليا، طبعا موضوع ان هو بيبقى فيه نتيجه دي بتمثل مشكله كبيره جدا بالنسبه للاطفال. لان خلاص هيبقى في عنده الدكتور مش هيتقبل اي ريسيرش ثيرابي وهيستمر معاه البليدنج. فيعني احنا استفدنا ان هو دلوقتي لو ادى لو دوز اوف فاكتور والفركتوز ما هياش كبيره يعني once per week دي will reduce even if given at regular period there will be no inhibitor. طبعا الموضوع ان هو يعني بصراحه يعني في المناطق اللي بيبقى فيها الهيموفيليا بالنسبه للأطفال. About the overview on the management of hemophilia and the Thalassemia patient in Western Children's School and Insurance Hospital.
السلام عليكم، اعتقد تعبتوا وجوعتوا وكل حاجه، فانا ان شاء الله هعدي القصه خفيفه ظريفه. بالاول انا بشكر اللجنه التي دعتني، واعتقد عشان اشكر البرزنتيشن بتاعتي هي شكر لاستاذتنا الدكتوره امال البشلاوي، وعشان التلميذ يشكر الاستاذ، فاعتقد اتمنى ان احنا نكون ادينا الشكر ده باللي احنا هنعرضه دلوقتي. دي مستشفى اطفال مصر، وهي اكبر قسم امراض دم تابع للهيئه العامه للتامين الصحي، واحنا 17 سنه من الخبره. الاسم عندنا بدا في سنه 93 از يونت اوف ذا جنرال بيدياتريك ديبارتمنت، وبعدين بقى سيبرال ديبارتمنت من اكتوبر 96، وهو one of the biggest specialized pediatric hematology department through the country under supervision of Professor Dr. أمال البشلاوي. دكتورة أمال البشلاوي هي من أنشأت ودعمت وساهمت وعلمت ثم واصلت العلم معنا، ثم واصلت معها الأستاذة الدكتورة منى التاجي، فنشكرهم شكرا جزيلا، وإن شاء الله هيكون الشكر ده. The biggest referral center provides comprehensive healthcare service and the highest quality of medical care for patients with blood disease. احنا بنشتغل 7 ايام و24 ساعة، احنا بنشتغل شخصيا من الساعة 9 للساعة 5 وبنواصل بعد كده ال7 ايام. ده التيم بتاعنا، ويرأس التيم الدكتورة إيزيس مراد. This team approach means that patient benefit from the combined talented and the expertise of hematologists, practitioners, nurses, social workers, dentists, physiotherapists, orthopedists, and lab technologists, coordinate inpatient or outpatient care service with patients are examined by the same caregiver ongoing basis, provide continuity of care, familiarity and trust. ودي احد الحاجات اللي بتميز القسم عندنا، ان احنا وحده الاي ار هي مرتبطه بوحده الاوت بيشنت والان بيشنت، كلهم مرتبط باسم الهيماتولوجي، وان العيان بيجي لنفس الدكتور هو عارف مين اللي هيتابع معاه وهيشتغل معاه ازاي، العيان مش تايه، ودي تميز الاسم عندنا. لاننا عندنا اعتقاد شديد جدا ان الهيماتولوجي هو ارت اند ساينس، ان احنا بنتعامل مع بيرسون بينج وبادي ومايند وسول، وان احنا عارفين انه لازم يبقى عندنا ساينتفك ونولج وايفيدنس بيزد ميديسين، يبقى احنا هنشتغل بعد كده على ان الجود هيماتولوجيست از ا جود ارتست وذ سفيشنت ساينتفك نولج، وبالتالي احنا ده الفريق اللي هيعزف بعد كده وهيعزف ان هارموني، وهنشوف عزفه هيبقى ازاي. ده الكور تيم بتاعنا. وهعدي بسرعه. والكور تيم احنا عدد قليل جدا من الاطباء، لكن يمكن الريزيستنس عندنا هو اللي بيعوض العدد الكبير ده. ده التيم ورك، ودي البيلر بتاعتنا ان احنا ناس هارد وركينج بروفيشنال ويلينج تو بول كوميونيكيشن، ودول الثلاثه يونتس اللي احنا هنشتغل عليهم. التريتمنت سنتر بتاعنا في ديلي اوت بيشنت كلينيك من 60 ل 75 بيشنت، وان بيشنت احنا عندنا 40 سرير وساعات بنوصل ل 60 سرير عشان بناخد الاقسام الثانيه، وعندنا ترانسفيوجن يونت من 30 ل 40 سرير، والثلاسيميا سنتر وسيكل سيل سنتر وهيموفيليا سنتر وبون مارو فيلير سنتر. دي الاستاتستيك بتاعتنا، ويمكن لما بدانا في سنه 97 يبقى عدد اللي كنا بندخلهم كان حوالي 1500، لكن احنا وصلنا في سنه 2012 ل 10000، وهنوصل السنه دي ان احنا التارجت بتاعنا هيبقى 16000، لكن ليست القصه في العدد. اكوردنج لتعريفات الCDC فاحنا 80% من عيانينا يا ايمرجنت يا ارجنت، يعني معنى كده محتاج تيم ورك بيشتغل بمنتهى القوه والشده. العياده احنا بنشوف فيها حوالي، يمكن الدكتوره اديس وانا والاستاف اللي معانا بنشوف فيها 1500 عيان ل 1600 عيان في الشهر. الثلاسيميا سنتر والسيكل سيل سنتر هي مالتي ديسيبلينري ابروتش، علشان في النهايه احنا عايزين هاي كواليتي اوف كير واوبتيمال اوتكم. الاوت بيشنت كلينيك تشمل الدايجنوزس، الترانسفيوجن ريجيمين، الكليشن ثيرابي اللي هو تحولنا لكل ما هو تحت ال10 سنين، فاورال كليتنج ايجنت اللي اكثر من 10 سنين يمكن هو اللي ما زال او في كونترا انديكيشن باستخدام الاورال ما زال بيستخدم الديسفيرال. احنا بنفولو اب العيان، التريتمنت اوف هيموسيدروزس، تيتشنج اديوكيشن، سكريننج بروجرام، وبالتالي احنا بنتعاون كفور تيم مع السيرجري كلينيك ومع الكارديولوجي كلينيك ومع الاندوكراينولوجي ومع الاورثوبيديك كلينيك. الترانسفيوجن يونت 25 ل 30 عيان، بنستخدم الفلتر والوش الترانسفيوجن ريجيمين لكل عيان، ريكوردنج اوف ترانسفيوجن رياكشن، وكل عيان بيبقى ليه الكارت بتاعه. عدد عيانينا الثلاسيميا هو السنه دي عدى ال1000، كان 972، والكوست لكل عيان في الشهر بيتكلف زي ما قلنا دلوقتي في المؤتمر الصحفي بالنيو اورال كليتنج ايجنت اللي اقل من 6 سنين يكلف من 1000 ل 1800 جنيه، ده كليشن فقط على نفقه التامين الصحي في الشهر، والاكثر من 6 سنين من 1500 ل 2000 او ل 3000 في الشهر. هو احنا في الانفيشن بنعمل ايه؟ تريتمنت اوف انفكشن، تشيست انفكشن، جي اي تي انفكشن، انترايتس، جاسترونترايتس، بيريتونايتس، هيباتيك ابسس. بنعد بري اوبراتيف بريباريشن للسبلينكتومي والكوليسيستكتومي، واحنا بنعمل حوالي 40 ل 50 عمليه في السنه، لكن يمكن هنعرض حالات دلوقتي هي بتعتبر الحالات الاولى على مستوى العالم، ودي اول حاله ريكوردد في العالم ان هو يبقى ثلاسيميا وهايداتد سيست، والهايداتد سيست ده ليفر هايداتد سيست، وبعدين بعد سنتين جه بماسل بريكارديال افيوجن. العيان كان عنده ماسل بريكارديال افيوجن اند كارديوجينيك شوك. ازاي العيان ده اتعمل له تيم ورك من انتنسيف كير، من لاب، من كارديولوجي، من كارديو سيرجري، من هيماتولوجي، وازاي الماركت بريكارديال افيوجن ده اتعمل له بريكارديوتنتيسيس، وكنا بنسحب في اليوم الواحد من 800 ل 1000 على مدى 6 اسابيع، لان قلت والعيان خرج بالسلامه. ودي اول حاله ريكوردد في العالم، هم 100 حاله ريكوردد في العالم بهايداتد سيست بريكارديال افيوجن، لكن دي الحاله الوحيده اللي هي فيها ثلاسيميا. دي التشيست اكس راي والام ار اي والايكو بتاع العيان لما جه خارج بعد 6 اسابيع وهو ما زال على البنبازول. بنعمل ايه كمان؟ تريتمنت اوف كارديك بروبلمز، والحمد لله بعد الاورال كليتنج ايجنت دي قلت جدا. الثلاسيميا عندنا ثلاسيميك بيشن والسب اورتيك ممبرين، 2 منهم عملوا عمليات، وازاي كنا بنتعاون مع الكارديو ثوراسيك سيرجري، واحد ستيل ويتنج اوبريشن. عندنا 2 عيانين اي اس دي، وازاي بيتحضروا عشان يعملوا باندنج. لكن من اصعب الحالات اللي احنا بنشوفها واللي بتتحول لنا من جميع المراكز الثلاسيميا الانترميديا والسيفير الومينايزيشن، ازاي على مدى شهور طويله بندي اميونو سبريسيف تريتمنت علشان نوصل للسبلينكتومي، علشان بعد كده نوصل العيان ان نو مور ترانسفيوجن. عندنا السيكل سيل وذ ديفرنت كرايسيس، الكونجنتال سفير والسيكلين كرايسيس، دي برضو الحاله الاولى في العالم، ودي كانت سنه 1996. كانت ثلاسيميا وذ مايوباثي نتيجه كارنيتين مايوباثي، والعيان هو ثلاسيميا وترانسفيوجن ديبندنت وهاي سيرم فيرتين، وكان جايه بليمبنج وبعدين كومبليت انابيليتي تو ووك، وطلع ان هو كارنيتين. وازاي لما اخذ كارنيتين اتحسن، ودي ريكوردد اول مره في العالم. انا بعدي بسرعه علشان طبعا عيانين كتير بيبقى عندهم اكسترا ميدالري هيماتوبيسيس، لكن ده العادي بيجي بأبر موتور نيورون ليجن، لكن لما العيان يبقى عنده 6 سنين وجاي لنا بماسيف بريكارديال افيوجن اند ماسيف اسايتس ونو اذر كوز، ونكتشف ان هي نتيجه انها عنده سوفت تيشو هيموبياتيك ماس في الابر ميدياستاينم، كانت برضو اول مره ريكوردد في العالم. دي الثلاسيميا سنتر. هننقل على طول عشان الدكتور مجدي ديكيابي للهيموفيليا سنتر، والهيموفيليا سنتر عندنا من اقوى الهيموفيليا سنتر، بيمد كومبريهنسيف كير تو تشيلدرن ويز كونجينيتال بليدنج ديس اوردر، هيموفيليا اي اند بي، فون فيلبراند كواجيليشن ديس اوردر، بليتنج ديس اوردر. وده عدد العيانين 441 عيان باختلافاتهم الشديده، يمكن عيانين الهيموفيليا 368 عيان، واعمارهم من اول يوم ومن اول يومين ومن اول شهر لغايه 16 سنه 18 سنه، والكوست لكل عيان في الهيموفيليا اللي اقل من 6 سنين بيتكلف من 7000 الى 12000، اللي اكثر من 6 سنين بيتكلف من 15000 ل 22000 في الشهر على نفقه التامين الصحي. والمودريت اقل من 6 سنين من 3000 ل 6000، والاكثر من 6 سنين من 7000 ل 10000 على نفقه التامين الصحي. دول العيانين بتوعنا يمكن 41% بيمثلوا من محافظات مختلفه، 59% من القاهره. او احنا بنعمل ايه في الهيموفيليا سنتر؟ دايجنوزيس بيزك لاب فاكتور اسي، وده بيبقى في المعامل المركزيه والفولو اب اوف ذا بيشنت. المانجمنت بتاعتنا اون ديموند، وبدانا ننفذ ما قاله الدكتور مجدي ديكيابي دلوقتي ان هو يبقى بروفيلاكسس. بنستخدم الكرايو، والكرايو العادي خلاص بقينا كله بنستخدمه سولفنت ديترجنت وفاكتور 8 والبلازما والاذر انتي فايبرينوليتيك. احنا بنجيب حوالي 2000 واحنا المفروض محتاجين 4000. يشد حلو معانا الدكتور مجدي ديكيابي وحده سولفنت ديترجنت من الكرايو. دي البلازما اللي احنا بنستخدمها. دي الاذر سيرفيس الاورثوبيديك سيرفيس، واحنا بنعمل فيها ايه؟ ايفالويشن اوف ذا ماسكولوسكيليتال سيستم، مانجمنت اوف ذا اورثوبيديك بروبلم، سبلاي اوف اكسترنال بريسنج ني سبورت. ودي العمليات الاورثوبيديك اللي احنا عملناها، عمليات طويله عريضه استغرقت مننا ومن التيم كله مجهود كبير جدا. ودي احد الحاجات. دي السيرجيكال انترفيرنس، ويمكن السيرجيكال انترفيرنس عندنا سيركمسيجن، هيرنيا، هايبوسبيديس، لكن في الشهرين الثلاثه 3 حالات جم لنا 3 عيانين هيموفيليا ايه ويز ماسيف انترنال بليدنج شوك، ودخلوا الانتنسيف كير عشان بوست تروماتيك رابتشر سبلين. دي يجيب عيان هيموفيليا ايه جاي بشوك بوست تروماتيك رابتشر سبلين، احدهم كان عنده 8 بيتا انهبيتور. قد ايه احتاجت مجهود من انتنسيف كير، من لاب، من هيماتولوجيست، من بلاد بانكينج، من البيدياتريك سيرجري، واتعملوا وكلهم خرجوا سيف ديسشارج. ده الفيزيوثيرابي، والفيزيوثيرابي روتين ايفالويشن وريهابيليتيشن اوف ذا ماسل وريديوكيشن اند ريكومنديشن اوف اكتيفيتي فيتنس وسبورت. ودي الدنتال سيرفيس، ودي جدول الدنتال سيرفيس اللي احنا بنعمله في الشهر، بنعمل ايه وازاي بنحضر العيان قبليها according to the guidelines. دي السايكوثيرابي سيرفيس، ومعانا دكتوره فايزه يمكن بتشتغل معانا سايكوثيرابي، واحنا من السنتر القليله قوي اللي احنا عملنا ديفلوبمنت للسايكوثيرابي سنتر بالنسبه للهيموفيليا. ده البولماروفيليا سنتر، واحنا عندنا الابلاستيك انيميا، المايلوديسبلاستيك، الفانكوني، بيوريتس، الابنيزيا. وتكلفه العيان في الان بيشن من 1500 ل 2500 بير دي. البولمارو ترانسبلانتيشن، وزي ما عرض الدكتور علاء النهارده ان احنا عملنا 152 حاله كانوا ثلاسيميا، وعندنا اوت بيشنت كلينيك وان بيشنت كلينيك للترانسفيوجن والتريتمنت اوف انفكشن وفيفر ونوتروبينيا والتريتمنت اوف ليكوبينيا. ويمكن كانوا الفيري انترستنج برضه ان احنا كان عندنا بانسايتوبينيا ونيورولوجيكال مانيفستيشن 4 كيسز بفيتامين بي 12 ديفيشنسي، سيريبيلا كاتاكسيا، وسب اكيوت كومبايل ديجنراتيف ديس اوردر. وكان عندنا حالتين ابلاستيك انيميا بقى سكندري باروكسيزمال نوكتورنال هيموجلوبينوريا، وجايين باكستنسيف ثرومبوزيس اوف سوبيريور ترانسفيرسيف مايت ساينس زي ما احنا شايفين في الام ار. انا بقول بسرعه على يا رب. دي الاكتيفيتيز بتاعتنا، احنا لازم نحط الجايد لاينز، الفولو اب استراتيجي، الويكلي ساينتفك ميتنج، المانثلي جراند راوند، اورجانيزيشن اند شيرنج انترناشونال اند انترناشونال كونفرنس، ثلاسيميا، هيموفيليا، دياتريك هيماتولوجي سوسايتي اند اذر سوسايتي. ده التيم وورك. ويمكن ما يميز منظومه التامين الصحي ان المنظومه محكومه جدا بين دكتور المدرسه، وبعدين اتحول للعياده، وبعدين اتحول للتيرشري سنتر. ودي في حد ذاتها بتخلي العيان هو عارف كويس قوي هو هيعمل ايه. ومن هنا بندعو من شرفنا بان احنا نشتغل في منظومه التامين الصحي فعليه الالتزام بهذه المنظومه. ولدينا بطاقه صحيه الى ان نعمل الانترانت، ان هو لازم شود بي دوكيومنتد كل حاجه، لان هو العيان لما بيجي لنا رايح المنوفيه ورايح اسيوط ورايح سوهاج والعكس صحيح، فالمنظومه تدور والعيان عشان تبقى الفولو اب فيري ميتيكلس فولو اب. دي البروجرام بتاعتنا كونتينوس ميديكال اديوكيشن للسكول دكتور، للبوست جراديوت، للام ار سي بي، للمينستري اوف هيلث دكتور. دي الفاميلي بروجرام واحنا بنعملها، بدانا نعمل يمكن بالتعاون بالتعاون مع نوفارتس بدانا نعمل educational سيشن للعيانين واهاليهم. يمكن لان احنا قلنا ان احنا ارت اند ساينس، فاحنا بيهمنا جدا ان كل عيان يعبر عن نفسه، فبنجيب دايما الوان وبنعمل حفلات للعيانين علشان نخرج القصه يبقى البيشنت انتيميت ريليشن دكتور شيب. اللينكس بتاعتنا للورد فيدريشن للانترناشونال ساينتفك كوميدي اند اذر ايجيبشن سوسايتيز. يمكن ان احنا عارفين كويس قوي ان النجاح هو عباره عن رحله، الرحله دي لازم هتكمل بالشباب اللي هو قاعد ورا. الشباب ده عنده احلامه ان هو يبقى عنده سبيشالايزد هوسبيتال احنا لازم هنقدر. يس وي كان. في اهداء. انا لما جيت اهدي واشكر كل الناس لقيت ان انا هحط لسته طويله عريضه، فشكرت كل ايد امتدت لينا وكل عقل ساعدنا وكل قلب وكل دمع من دموع العيانين. اشكركم وبهدي نجاحي ده ليكم والمستشفى اطفال مصر. شكرا لكم.
شكرا. Very impressive.
يعني يا ريت كل الناس في السنترز تشتغل بالطريقه دي، خصوصا في التامين، ونبقى مع بعض كلنا والسنتر هم الشباب هم اللي بيشتغلوا. ما انت لسه شباب.
لا انا خلاص.
اجين بروفيسور دكتور مجدي الكياني، بيولوجي هيماتولوجي اند هيموفيليا. Again,
شكرا دكتور، وشكرا لكم انكم عندكم صبر انكم تنتظروا. I'll try to be brief. أنا ممكن احنا I will entitle the project that we have been working on for 10 years now to develop alternatives the needed products which are the biologicals. The biologicals are medicinal products derived from human blood. Some of these products can be alternatively manufactured by recombinant technology. والدراجز دي بتستخدم mainly في bleeding disorders, في immune disorders, في chronic liver and kidney disease and others. ايه هي البيولوجيكالز اللي هم الالبومين والميونوجلوبولين فاكتور 8 والفاكتور 9 and to show that these products it's easy to say but it's very difficult to have accessibility. We look here into Egypt. The consumption of factor 8 is probably the lowest in the region. We have only 0.19 IU per capita, while I think in UK it may be like 5 or 6 units per capita. Also, if we look to the immunoglobulins, we'll find that Egypt here, so we don't have enough accessibility to our patients for these products. So, in order to do this, we need to have an access to the plasma fractionation, and the elements of plasma fractionation is the source of recovered plasma collection, testing, and storage. We need to have cold chain transport, and we need to have a manufacturing facility, and above all, we need to have a competent local medicinal regulatory agency and array of legislation supporting blood collection, storage, and manufacture. And these words are easy to say, difficult to achieve, because we need to reach the international level in order to go into this industry. The capacity of any plant a minimum of 100,000 liters, and at least currently, to be cost effective, is 500,000 liters of plasma. And we need here to study the parameters cost of the plasma, the product portfolio, and the yield of deriving products. If you look to the dynamics of the plasma industry, you will find that the cost in the plasma industry, the main cost goes into the raw materials. If we compare it to the normal pharmaceutical industry, we can see the cost of the raw material is here. So it's a huge challenge. So for countries which want to embark into these technologies, particularly developing countries, how would we look? We are here, the current therapy, where we have the plasma-derived and recombinant products, and very soon we'll have the long-lasting products or the long-acting products and the gene transfers for the developed world. And we are talking here about budgets of millions of dollars per patient. Or we will go like backwards, where we started the mini-pool solvent detergent cryoprecipitate, or the biosimilars, when this will enter the current therapy, may be offered to the developing countries as a generic production, which will give hope to patients in our regions. So the concept of the mini plasma processing for developing countries, which we started 10 years ago, was to change production facility into a single-use processing medical device, a very simple solution. Second is to reduce the batch size from thousands of liters to only a few liters. And third, to have to follow local regulations and practices, and no need to go into the international regulatory framework, which, I mean, the local regulations are not less than the international regulations, but it is the process of documentation and how to reach the international language. So, I mean, following local regulations does not mean by any means that you are following less standards than the international regulations. The second is we need to upgrade our blood transfusion services to develop localized blood transfusion standards, training and audit programs, adapt centers to the new technology, and implement the good manufacturing practice concept. So we started this as an adventure in 2003-2006 as a group of investigators from Cairo University, from our center, and from France. And we developed the concept in the lab during 2004-2005, and then we talked to the industry when they became interested in 2004 and committed in 2006, and then they started industrialization and commercialization in 2009-2010. This was our first paper about the development to treatment the cryoprecipitate by the solvent and detergent, thereby changing it into an alternative to the factor concentrates. This was our imagination of the first prototypes that we thought of and did not work very well, but the industry understood and asked us for more development, and during this time they started building their facility in Switzerland, and this was the final product, a device that where you can process 6 liters of plasma to produce an alternative to factor 8 from Velebram, fibrinogen, and factor 13 in one product. And in the meantime, we started validation of this medical device extensively, and we published our first validation in the transfusion medicine in 2010, where we addressed the safety of the medical device regarding the toxicity, the removal of the solvent and detergent, the effect on the plasticizer in the medical device, and the animal studies, which all prove the safety of our product. Then we started the first evaluation as a pharmacokinetic study of mini-pool solvent detergent filter cryoprecipitate factor 8, which proved that this product is identical to the plasma-derived and the recombinant factor 8. And then the subsequent step in the development was the registration in the Ministry of Health, which we have achieved early this year. After 2 years of hard work with the Ministry of Health to get the registration of the product. And in parallel with the external development, we did our internal homework as well, is to have a reference center for this technology. which is compliant with the GMP standards, including classified air rules, clean practice, and the GMP concept. We have all the sophisticated, up-to-date facility equipment for NAT test, for serology testing using the Architect, which is the benchmark, and the ID-NAT for all the deletions using the Novartis technology. We have quality control and very highly trained staff. We have monitor of the environment and the cold chain in the center. And all this could produce for this, at the end, this product. It's a very safe product where for the first time this SD-treated cryoprecipitate, you have the factor 8 dose, you have the fibrinogen dose, you have the foam Willebrand dose, and you can also dose label the factor 13, a product that can use to a variety of diseases, foam Willebrand disease, hemophilia A, fibrinogen deficiency, in DIC, in postpartum hemorrhage. So it is an array with a very safe, simple product. So what is the processing capacity of this center? We aim to have this center to process 90,000, which is equivalent to 18,000 liters of plasma. Processing capacity is based on one shift, 8 hours. Number of technical staffs, 2 to prepare the cryoprecipitate from FFP, 2 for serology and NAT testing, 2 for immunohematology work, 2 for quality control, 5 for the mini-pool SD cryoprecipitate processing, and 4 for the logistics. So the total number of the staff is 17, and the capacity can be doubled by only doubling the staff and doubling the working hours. So we can, as the request of Dr. Naglabi, we will soon increase our plasma production, and based on this, we will improve our capacity. The processing time, plasma is separated from snap frozen within 6 hours from preparation, quarantined for 38 hours at -30, serology NAT and immunohematology during the quarantine overnight following of released FFP, processing of mini pools, cryoprecipitate within 6 hours, and then we have the ability to produce from 20 to 30,000 units of factor 8 per day for logistic advantages, less cold warehouse because we only need to store 1,000 units of plasma, and we will, after this, we will be using 300 units each day, so no need to thousands of liters of plasma stored in a warehouse, which is really expensive and needs a lot of work. Flexibility in production, you can have a very small lab or you can have a large facility. High throughput with less infrastructure, limited capital investment, and serve as a training hub for technology duplication. Now we are opting to other countries to implement the technology, and we have the model for other countries when they want to use the technology. We want an in-country sponsor to register the medical device and supply it to and then a local delegation of a national blood service or a central lab, gap analysis to identify needs and program design technology transfers, which is very soon. Now it is registered in Saudi Arabia, and they are starting the validation of this technology. We had a delegation from Indonesia, and next week they will sign with us the technology transfer in Indonesia. We had a meeting with the Ministry of Health of Sudan, and they are starting to implement the technology. So, and in less affluent countries like Cameroon, we need to work on the infrastructure of the blood transfusion services to have a better production. But this is becoming in the interest of many organizations like the PEPFAR or now Novo Foundation, where they are working with us to improve this situation. Our next product that we will start hopefully within 1 to 2 years is the IgG enriched preparation. The product is very promising from the lab-wise. It will avoid a lot of complications in the industrial product because it will be fresh and will not need stabilizer and can be blood group specific. So for the kids, hopefully will be much safer than the industrial product, but we are anticipating 2 years of work to go into this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bagdi Kiadi, for this lecture. And now, closing the session to take lunch. Thank you.
الأشكالي والأورجنايزنج كوميتي for such distinguished congress. الحقيقة يسعدني ويشرفني to have the pleasure to share in such distinguished congress. And first of all, I want to introduce Professor Dr. Iman Mansour and Professor Dr. Azza, both are professors in the Clinical Pathology Department of Al-Azhar University. I would like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to this conference. And I'm really proud to be chair Dr. Azam, my professor, in this session. Actually, it makes me feel so small to share her with this. She's the mother of hemoglobinopathy diagnosis. And any problem, she is the problem solver, not the HPLC. So let's see. High performance liquid chromatography, the problem solving tool in hemoglobinopathies. Hemoglobinopathies are abnormalities of hemoglobin synthesis, and they are among the most common inherited disorders of man. They are quantitative thalassemia syndrome or qualitative variant hemoglobins, but the definite identification of hemoglobinopathies can only be achieved by a stepwise and algorithmic approach. Why is it important to diagnose hemoglobinopathies? This growing importance lies in the fact that there's a requirement for antenatal diagnosis for the significant disorders of the globin chain synthesis. All individuals of all ethnic groups except the Northern European Caucasians are recommended to be screened for variant hemoglobins, while all ethnic groups are required to be screened for beta thalassemia. Selected ethnic groups are required to be screened for the thalassemias. We can make a presumptive diagnosis for the hemoglobinopathy through thorough clinical history taking, hematological evaluation, including complete blood pictures, reticulocytic count, red blood cell morphology, and also protein-based analytical methods, hemoglobin electrophoresis or isoelectric focusing, high-performance liquid chromatography with a cation exchange or reverse phase, and capillary zone electrophoresis. Family studies plays a role in clinching diagnosis in some cases. To reach a definitive diagnosis of the disorder, we need nucleic acid-based methods. These include polymerase chain reaction, reverse transcribed polymerase chain reaction, and sequencing of the genomic DNA or the RT-PCR amplified globin of the gene of interest. The hemoglobin electrophoresis can be performed at two pHs, an alkaline pH and an acid pH, and they go hand in hand as complementary tools for reaching a diagnosis. But at alkaline pH, you can see that electrophoretic migration of hemoglobin C, E, A2, and O Arab is similar. Also, S, hemoglobin lipoor D and G co-migrate together. At the acid pH, electrophoretic separation of C from E and O Arab and S from D and G is accomplished. However, it is not possible to differentiate between the hemoglobin E, O Arab, and D and G and lipoor using electrophoretic methods. This is a schematic representation of relative mobilities of some abnormal hemoglobins adopted from the Bain et al. In 2012. We can see that at the A2 band, we have migrating C, E, C Harlem, O Arab, and at the S region, we have the G, the Q India, the Hasharon, and the lipoor. Using citrate agar, the Hasharon still migrates with the S, but we separated the lipoor from the S, but it still cannot be separated from the G. So what are the disadvantages of the electrophoresis? It is slow, labor-intensive, inaccurate in quantitation of low concentration of hemoglobin variants, or in the detection of fast hemoglobin variants such as the hemoglobin H and hemoglobin bars. The precision and accuracy of hemoglobin A2 measurement using densitometric scanning of electrophoretic gels is poor, especially when compared with HPLC techniques. So let's see the HPLC now. How can you use HPLC in diagnosis? Diagnosis using HPLC depends on three main properties. Number one, the retention time of the hemoglobin. Number two, the percent of the hemoglobin. Number three, the peak characteristic of what is called the chromatographic pattern.
In general, the percent hemoglobin alpha or beta is an initial predictor of whether alpha or beta, because hemoglobin percent in alpha variants is less than 30%, while in the beta variants it's usually more than 34%, with the exception of hemoglobin E and the G CDH. The other advantages are quantifying hemoglobin F and A2 along with hemoglobin variant screening in a single highly reproducible system to screen for hemoglobin variants and hemoglobinopathies along with the thalassemias. The HPLC is more sensitive to the presence of hemoglobin H than the alkaline electrophoresis. Retention time on HPLC is reliable, reproducible, and in many cases superior to conventional electrophoresis and detection and identification of hemoglobin variants. Confirmatory testing by electrophoresis can be eliminated in the majority of cases by use of retention time, proportion of total hemoglobin, and peak characteristics of HPLC. This is the BioVan Radiant 2, Variant 2. The windows for the retention times, it's usually calibrated for the thalassemia program, so it's usually calibrated for the A2 and the F. And these are the different retention times. We have here the A0, the A2, the F window, the S window, and the C window, the D window. Hemoglobin variants with retention time less than 0.63, which are tetramers of hemoglobin parts and hemoglobin H, and the acetylated form of hemoglobin F, which is only present in neonates, loop before the chromatogram integration, so they detect it only visually. We have to confirm for the hemoglobin H by the hemoglobin H inclusions. How can you differentiate of variants attained in the same window? In the hemoglobin F window, we have 4 beta and 3 alpha variants that migrate in with the same retention time. The differentiation is based on hemoglobin electrophoresis. A percent more than 10% is in favor of other variants than the F, with the exception of the thalassemia major, which may be much more than 10%. In the B2 window, we have the A1C and hemoglobin HOPE, yet hemoglobin HOPE percent usually has a mean of 45%, which is much more than that expected for the A1C. In the B3 window, we have 5 beta variants and 4 alpha variants that could be differentiated with retention time, percent hemoglobin, but still we have to revert to the hemoglobin electrophoresis. In the A0, this is an example of where the chromatographic pattern comes, because the cone has a specific chromatographic pattern. So we can differentiate the cone in the A0 window by its characteristic chromatographic pattern diagram, which will be shown later. Now in the A2 window, we have the A2, the lipoor, and the D around. Here the lipoor migrates with the A2, while in the alkaline pH it migrates with S. So they both go hand in hand, the electrophoresis with the HPLC. We'll see a band migrating in the S region with alkaline pH, while on going to the HPLC it will migrate to the A2. At the D region, we have beta variants. The core blue versus hemoglobin D Punjab and G Philadelphia could be differentiated by retention time and percent hemoglobin only, while hemoglobin D Punjab versus the G Philadelphia also by the retention time without percent hemoglobin. In the hemoglobin S window, the hemoglobin E Saskatoon versus hemoglobin S can be differentiated using the retention time only, the hemoglobin Manitoba and Montgomery, and the A2- versus hemoglobin S using retention time and percent hemoglobin, the hemoglobin Montgomery versus Manitoba by different mobilities on electrophoresis. At the C window, we have the G Raj versus the hemoglobin C and hemoglobin O Arab, which can be differentiated with the retention time, hemoglobin O Arab versus hemoglobin C by retention time and electrophoresis at acid pH as the microinfant. This is the normal HPLC with retention times. You can see it's calibrated here for the F and the A2, the shaded parts. And this is the example of the chromatographic pattern. Chromatographic pattern for hemoglobin O, we have a dilution peak for the intact hemoglobin at 2.26 here. And another secondary peak of denatured hemoglobin versus unstable hemoglobin here at 4.9, near the S or the C window. For the hemoglobin report, the specific chromatographic pattern is the hump present in the A2 region. The Hasherone has a characteristic peak before and after the illusion, the retentive specific code. The ORR demonstrates a minor peak at 3.9 minutes, which is absent in C samples. So for the screening of heterozygous fetal thalassemia, the increased level of A2 acts as a reliable marker. Now, on comparing two systems, we have the HBSC from the biorad variant 2 and the CBN capillary zone electrophoresis. We can see that in normal individuals, the mean of hemoglobin A2 is higher using the variant 2 than the CBN. In the beta thalassemias, we have the A2 is higher using the HBSC. And that's why the cutoff for the A2 to diagnose a carrier of heterozygous for beta thalassemia using the biorad is more than 4%. It's less using the capillary zone. So I'm comparing both of them as regards to the A2 level. So without variant, we have a higher capillary zone sensitivity, while with an S variant, we have a higher HPLC level of A2 as the glycated products of hemoglobin S co-migrate with A2. When C variant is present, we cannot differentiate usually in the capillary zone as the two peaks overlap. But we have a little carryover using the HPLC. Hemoglobin E and hemoglobin A2, the E peak overlaps the A2, but we said there's a characteristic hump following the A2 peak. But complete separation can be done using the capillary zone electrophoresis. In samples lacking the hemoglobin A, such as in cases doubly heterozygous for the SLC, there's no special effect, no sample treatment is required using the HBLC. While using the capillary zone electrophoresis, we have to dilute the sample with normal blood, as the hemoglobin A is essential in measuring in the capillary zone electrophoresis. So there's a conclusion to conclude there is no useless test in hemoglobin detection. Even with the advent of HPLC and capillary zone electrophoresis, there are occasions when the migration patterns of a properly performed alkaline and acid electrophoresis provide the piece of data that allows positive identification of the abnormal hemoglobin. But actually, above all, we need the interpreter, and we don't have better than Professor Dr. Azam for the coming cases.
I have to thank the organizing committee and Professor Dr. Aman for giving me the chance to have this small piece of knowledge about cases diagnosed by HPDC and hemoglobin electrophoresis. This one, once is okay. He was a male child, 5 years old, known as a thalassemic patient, on regular blood transfusion with thalassemic phases. He has got positive consanguinity. The parents were seeking genetic counseling for prospective offspring. The complete blood count of the child has got mild normochromic normocytic anemia. That's because of the blood transfusion. He has got 50 normal blasts per 100 white blood corpuscles, mild leukocytosis, moderate thrombocytosis, and his reticulocytic count was 4%. This is a blood picture with minor magnification. Here it's better. Hapanocytosis, pegyrocytosis, target cells, some fragmented red cells, normoblasts, normoblastemia. It's a typical blood picture of a thalassemic patient. Another picture. Then, investigations for the parents were done. The complete blood count for the father was, hemoglobin was 14.8 normal, microcytic hypochromic, the MCV was 69, MCH 20, with occasional target cells, and normal white and normal platelet count, white cell count and the platelet count. That's his blood picture with an occasional target. The mother, this is also.
has got a complete blood count also. The hemoglobin was 12, still normal for the sex. MCV and the MCH were low. Occasional normoblast and the target cells were seen, and normal white cell count and normal platelet count. Here you have blood picture. This is a normoblast, and there is an X-ray process. Here target cell. Here. This is the hemoglobin electrophoresis of the family. This is the control, A, F, S, and A2. The child is under blood transfusion. So you have got very big A, a band at the S region, small band, and another small band at the S region, and very faint A2. The father has got this small band at S region, and the mother has got the same S band. So, in analyzing this electrophoresis, we have to see what is the abnormal hemoglobin present there in this region, which is the S region. We have got in the S region, as Dr. Iman said, the D, the S, the D, the Lipour, and the G Philadelphia. The G Philadelphia can be low because it's an alpha variant. It can be around in the 1 alpha region, around 25%, but it has no effect, it has no pathological effect. The patient is normal, or the carrier is normal. So we have to solve this problem. Why these small hemoglobin are present there in the S region? We revert to hemochromatography. The HPLC, this is for the baby. He has got F and A and high A2. Although in the electrophoresis, we couldn't even see the A2. It was very small. The A2 here is 6.9. The F is 26, and the A is the rest. Here is one of the parents. He has got 14.8 A2 in the HPLC. In the electrophoresis, there was just normal or low A2. So, the same for the other partner. He has got 12.9 A2. So, what hemoglobin which will migrate with the S and the electrophoresis and migrates with the H with the A2 and the HPLC from Dr. Iman's to? Huh? I know this is. Parents are heterozygous for hemoglobin Lipour, and the child is a homozygous supposed to be before blood transfusion for hemoglobin Lipour. What makes us diagnose this? The patient has got thalassemic blood picture, and the hemoglobin Lipour is a thalassemic hemoglobin. The other thing, that it migrates with the S region with a small percentage of hemoglobin in the traits, which goes with hemoglobin Lipour. And the mother and father are also hypochromic microcytic. So they are just like thalassemic traits. Second case, child 3 years old presenting with avascular necrosis of the femur head. His complete blood count with mild normochromic thrombocytic anemia. His MCH and MCV are normal, moderate leukocytosis, and mild thrombocytosis. This is his electrophoresis. A. That's this one, yes. He has got 2 bands, one at the S region and one at the A2 region. He is a double heterozygous for something. One of them is the S, supposed to be, and this is the other. This is his HPLC. He has got 44% S in the S window, 43% C, and the minor F, and normal A2. The father has got normal blood picture. His CBC completely normal, nothing. The mother has got nearly normal blood picture with an occasional target cell here, and this one. This is an irregular and a crystallization of hemoglobin C. This is the picture, the pattern of red cells in hemoglobin C disease. It's present in the trait. Then the HPLC for the father, he has got 39% S. Here is the S. and otherwise normal. And the A2 here is 4, which is the upper limit of the normal for HPLC. Because if this was electrophoresis, we'll have a question mark about that because it is increased. Now this is normal for the HPLC. The mother have got in the C window this peak 39%. So the diagnosis, the husband is an S carrier, the wife is a C carrier, and the child is a double heterozygous for SNC. Third case was a 16-year-old girl with no previous medical history and presentation. The CBC was with very mild normochromic normocytic anemia, there is slight anisotropic and no target cells or sickle cells. In hemoglobin electrophoresis, it shows a normal alert pattern. And in HPLC, there was a trace amount of S here, the hemoglobin electrophoresis, on alkaline pH, here on the acid pH, and here we have got a very small, here there's nothing except A, and A2 is not even apparent, but here A2 is there, and the A is here, and this is a very small peak at the S region. What suppose this diagnosis is? Somebody may say it may be an artifact or a mistake or something like that. No, this girl was diagnosed as, on the reversing on her past history, she was a sickle cell disease, but she has an almost complete suppression of hemoglobin S in a sickle cell disease patient undergoing long-term transfusion therapy. And this was, we discovered another case very recently in our hospital, in the children's hospital, with a baby doing electrophoresis for the first time in our lab. He has done it mostly before. And he has got very small amount of hemoglobin S and hemoglobin C. He has got 5% S and 4% C. And somebody said, what is this? It must be, it's a mistake, what is this? So when we go to the history and the family history, he has got a sibling with SC, and we didn't study the mother and father, that's why we didn't present the case, but he has got a sister with a double heterozygous SC. So mostly he was a double heterozygous SC, and he has got complete or nearly complete suppression of the abnormal hemoglobins by blood transfusion. Our last case is a male child with a complete blood picture of hemoglobin 10, normal chronic, normocytic, normal, whatever platelets, and you have got in the blood picture, although it's normal chronic, normocytic, anisotropic teardrops, fragmented red cells, basophilic stippling, and rare target cells. And his reticulocytic count was 7. And doing HPLC, he has nothing but hemoglobin F. No E2 and no A. All is F. So, now, if we have got 100% F in a child, and although he has got mild anemia, and strangely enough, it's normochromic normocytic or to the lower range of the MCV and the MCH. Why should he have 100% hemoglobin F? We have got two options for 100% hemoglobin F, and we have to verify which one of them. We have to do a family study. So the father has got normal hemoglobin, microcytosis and hypochromia, and anisocytosis. His RDW is 18. And the mother is hemoglobin electrophoresis showing 92.78, A2 is 2.2, and F is 5.1. We have to revise this. We have got a high F and a nearly normal, or to the worst, the low side of the A2. The mother is the same. She has got microcytosis and hypochromia and anisocytosis. And the electrophoresis is nearly more or less the same as the father, with A 88%, hemoglobin E2 is normal, and hemoglobin F is 9.3. How to diagnose this case? What could we see? We have got 100% F in the child. So we have two options. If it is a hereditary persistence of fetal hemoglobin or a delta beta thalassemia. picture is not giving us a very good clue. Still, the baby has got anisitosis, poikilocytosis, hypochromic red cells. Maybe he's presenting like a thalassemia intermedia in a way. If he has hereditary persistence, he should have nothing. But the most important is the family study. As the father and the mother, if it is a hereditary persistent, they should have hemoglobin F, like as we see, but they should have a normochromic, normocytic blood picture with no microcytosis or hypochromia or icytosis. Both have got thalassemic blood picture, like a trait, a thalassemia trait, and they have got normal or towards the low A2 and high F. So the diagnosis is the parents are heterozygous for delta beta thalassemia, and the child is a homozygous for delta beta thalassemia. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Azza and Dr. Ian, for this very interesting presentation. Very
I have the pleasure to introduce Professor Mustafa Rizk, Professor of Pathology at Alexandria University, and his talk is Moving to a Capillary Electrophoresis Platform, Assessing the Role in Hemoglobinopathies.
Moving to a capillary electrophoresis platform assessing the role in hemoglobinopathies. Our agenda includes the theory of electrophoresis and the capillary electrophoresis principle, and ending with the hemoglobinopathies assessment. Electrophoresis is a comprehensive term that refers to the migration of charged solutes or particles of enzymes in a liquid medium under the influence of an electric field. The electrophoresis method used to study the proteins was the free solution or moving boundary method devised by Thalassemia. Thalassemia was the first one to invent the moving boundary apparatus, and he got Nobel Prize for this technology. This was in 1948. From the World II until the late 1960s, the dominant separation techniques were paper chromatography for most uncharged analytes and paper electrophoresis for charged molecules as amino acids. So starting with the theory of electrophoresis. As you see here, this is the amino acid with in the isoelectric state with equal positive and negative charges. If we put this amino acid in alkaline medium with pH 8.3, the net charge on this amino acid will be negative charge, because the alkaline medium contains OH negative. It will take one H ion, and then the net charge will be negative. This amino acid will move to the anode because it carries a negative charge. Like here, all these particles contain negative charges, but the most rapid one is that carry excess negative charge. Also, the movement depends on the size and shape of the molecule. Here it's bigger, so this is more faster. In spite that they carry the same number of negative charges. cellulose acetate electrophoresis was popular in clinical laboratory because of its simplicity, reproducibility, reliability, and for its relative low cost. But the relatively poor resolution of most commercially available cellulose acetate membranes limited the sensitivity of the technique. In cellulose acetate electrophoresis, actually, maybe there's a big background that decrease the intensity and make difficult to detect some hemoglobin, like hemoglobin B2, in a normal concentration. Because of the need for pre-soaking and clearing, cellulose acetate electrophoresis was largely replaced by agarose gel electrophoresis. So starting by paper electrophoresis, then agarose gel electrophoresis, which is firstly adopted for the routine used by Laurel in 1962. Separation is based only on the charge to mass ratio of the protein. In 1972, Laurel reported some clinical advantages of using high resolution agarose gel electrophoresis system. Since the mid-90s, capillary zone electrophoresis has been developed for use in clinical labs, and it was extended quickly in the routine, being a very sensitive and fully automated system. This technique is a liquid-based system that bears some similarities to the early Vesalius system. It depends on a capillary that has a bore and coated by a silica. And this technique nowadays is commercially used through certain automated instruments like Sepia instruments or like Helena V8. And as you see here, the capillary, the length of the capillary may be up to 50 centimeters, from 20 to 50. And here we can put the capillary in a buffer and introducing the sample, and then migration of the molecules and detected by the detector, sent to the computer to be analyzed. As you see here, the membrane, the movement and the migration, the detector, and movement will be to the cassette. And because there is admission of high volt, there must be a control of the temperature through a certain Peltier system, and after that, detection of molecules migrated by the detector. So, what are the factors that control the migration of proteins? We have first electrophoresis. As you see here, we have negative and positive charges. The negative move to the anode. We said before that amino acids in alkaline medium will carry negative charge. And according to the number of negative charges, they will be more faster or less faster. So the most here moving to the anode that carry excess negative charge. What about the capillary? The capillary itself is lined by a silica, and the silica has OH negative charge. And this negative charge will attract from the buffer inside the capillary all the positive charges. So there is two layers, negative and positive charges. This buffer lined by positive charges will be attracted to the cathode. So we have two powers now, one electrophoretic moving to the anode, and one electroosmotic power moving to the cathode. I can give an example to simplify this, like the train moving in front and the people inside the train moving to the behind. And as you see here, the electroosmotic flow is more stronger than the electrophoretic. The electroosmotic flow is sufficiently stronger than the electrophoretic migration, and despite the peptides, which is negatively charged, electrophoretic migration towards the positive electrode, the electroosmotic flow is overwhelming. It is more strong than the electrophoretic. Here also the same. So the combination of a small capillary internal diameter and high voltage and tight temperature control directs proteins measurement at a specific wavelength, allows first analysis time, high throughput, excellent resolution, and reproducibility. And as you see here, it's migrating and moving. Now what about hemoglobinopathies? As we see here, heme is the association of a porphyric structure and a divalent iron atom. The globin is composed of polypeptide chains that are differentiated by their amino acid sequence. Here, the data are relative migration times. This is on capillary electrophysis. What occurs in capillary electrophysis? It's actually divided into different zones. This is on sepia apparatus. Zone 1 to zone 15. And the migration will be in this direction. So this is the fastest and this is the slowest in relation to the two bands. Every type and every variant of hemoglobin will stand in a certain zone. If we calibrate the electrode before we start the work by a certain control, which is hemoglobin A, at zone 9. So everything will be migrated into the specific zone. As here, after calibration, we have hemoglobin A at zone 9 and hemoglobin A2 at zone 3. And this is fixed. Now, putting into consideration that we have to calculate. This is serious as paper and hemoglobin A and hemoglobin A2. If we have a control, which is AFS A2C, as you see here, hemoglobin A at zone 9, F zone 7, S zone 5, and A2 at zone 2, and A2 at zone 3, and hemoglobin C at zone 2. So it is interpreting capillaries curve is like having the mountains in front of you. This is a geographic distribution of hemoglobinopathies. This is here Mediterranean area for Thalassemia, and as we see here, different types of hemoglobinopathies. This is hemoglobin E in South Asia, hemoglobin C in West Africa, and this is sickle cell, middle of Africa and some European countries on the sea. And here, hemoglobin D in Iran, Iraq. So, hemoglobinopathies systematic endemic area. After abnormality discovery on slide, either by microcytosis, hypochromia, target cells, this can help, and presence of unexplained hemolytic anemia, and family inquiry after detection of abnormal hemoglobin. The capillary electrophoresis allows screening of the main hemoglobin abnormalities in clinical interest. Hemoglobin S, C, D, E, hemoglobin F, H, hemoglobin bar. These are the most common abnormal hemoglobins. This is the data in the computer that includes all the hemoglobins that appear.
Radiologic and or histopathologic evidence of disease progression, relapse or death, giving period of follow-up of around 1.6 years, of mean of 1.6 years. The outcome measured with the overall survival, which is considered